Purpose, a caring approach to business.
Welcome, everybody!
If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give into it. Joy is not made to be a crumb. A quote by the wonderful Mary Oliver. Welcome to Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business by Pillar Nonprofit Network. I am your host and friend to all the neighborhood dogs, Miriam Waliji. I also act as the Vice President of Impact, Equity, and Governance here at Pillar, and was previously the Social Enterprise Program Manager and Coach. If you are new here, Pollinating Purpose is a show all about supporting organizations in creating social impact through their work. Whether nonprofit, for-profit, or grassroots organizations, you'll learn key considerations to starting or growing your social purpose business in a long-term and sustainable way. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to be chatting with one of my very own colleagues, Aditi Basdeo. Aditi leads with her heart. From her very first step into the social innovation sector, she has pulled on her personal story and challenges as motivators to move beyond the status quo. In 2018, Aditi founded Champions of Change Canada, a nonprofit that focuses on raising awareness for gender equality by empowering youth to lead community-centric fundraisers and campaigns. At Champions, Aditi held many roles, from resourcing to marketing, but closest to her heart is the role she held as a mentor for young people in her community. Through founding Champions, Aditi realized her passion for designing and building solutions. It was that calling that drew her to her work in engineering. Currently, Aditi is completing a dual degree in chemical engineering and business at Western University. Adjacent to her education, Aditi has been also engaged with social, economic, and environmental impact through her work with young people at Pillar Nonprofit Network, where she has reimagined the strategic role of youth-engaged impact in the organization. She has also expanded her horizons with social and environmental uses of capital through work with GoParity Canada and Community Foundations of Canada. In her spare time, Aditi can be found at the gym, adventuring in nature with friends, enjoying the sunlight, and in awe of all the puppy owners. She really wants one. Aditi is looking forward to connecting with you. If you can't tell by the bio alone, Aditi is an absolute marvel. I am constantly in awe of the work that she does and the passion that she has for ensuring that youth voices are included at the table. It is my belief that youth voices need to be a part of the solutions and conversations for our generation, and I am so excited for this opportunity to chat with Aditi today. Hey, Aditi.
Hi, Miriam.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to chat with you. I'm a big fan of what you specifically do with youth engagement, but also just I believe in youth engagement as a part of our future solutions. So having this conversation is really important to me, and I'm grateful that you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you. We always have such great conversations.
Whether about dogs or not, they're always great. So as we kind of get into the combo, can you share a little bit about your youth engagement experience and specifically what you've been doing here at Pillar?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, my youth engagement experience started back in 2018 when I was still in high school. And I'm still a youth myself, but at that time I was in with all the other high school students and really living in the moment of being a young person. And so that's when I started my first nonprofit called Champions of Change Canada. Mm-hmm. And Champions of Change is focused on advocating for gender equality through youth empowered initiatives. And so that was really where I got my whole base and foundation for youth engagement, was by being a youth, leading other youth in the community. And so that was such an important initiative to my growth with youth engagement, and was start of the beginning for how I got here at Pillar. And so a few years after starting Champions of Change, through meandering pathways with different connections, it's always how it goes, I was connected to a job opportunity here at Pillar, which was the youth engagement coordinator position. And when I got here, I was sort of told there's this program we have called Social 6, and we want you to do something with it, but we don't know what. And so kind of right off the bat, I was like, well, I have some free reign to build something out of it.
With it.
I did. I was kind of starting at like point zero and exploring and learning. And so for me, it was a great opportunity to learn. But for Pillar as well, we learned so much in that process because it was really something we hadn't explored in the same way before.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that leads to a really good point of that. Pillar included, a lot of organizations want to engage with youth, but really struggle to do so in a way that like sticks. And why do you think so many organizations struggle with this?
Yeah, it depends on the organization. There's so many different reasons why organizations get stuck and don't stick with youth. But in my experience, a huge component of it is that they're just not able to stay as moving and as mobile with young people in today's age, because they're with multiple factors, like digitalization is one, social media is part of that. Youth through COVID had so many changes, and so it's just super important right now that you have such an active and moving strategy around engaging youth, because from year to year, what you need to be doing changes.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and that oftentimes when, you know, an organization does that stakeholder analysis or that audience kind of environmental scan, it's like, okay, this environment or this audience likely will stay fairly static in what their needs and, you know, objectives are for the most part, but youth is one where it's such a pivotal time for them, but also in the landscape of like our socio-political climate where things shift really quickly, so that practice of how we engage with all other kind of stakeholders, you know, partners, funders, customers, audiences, whatever, doesn't necessarily translate to the same way that we engage with youth.
Exactly, yeah. And just adding on there, I think, as you mentioned, we have all these relationships from a business standpoint that we have to maintain, and going into those relationships and managing them is completely a different ballgame than working with young people.
Yeah.
When you work with young people, a lot of the time, one of the biggest points that I carry throughout my work is that you should never create something for young people without young people. And I think that's the biggest mistake a lot of organizations make, is they're not involving youth early enough in the process.
Yeah, I think that speaks to something, because with most stakeholders, you know, someone might say like, oh, I've never actually been a part of that group before, I don't know their experiences. But everyone's been a youth, but their context of being a youth is really different. So they might rely on like what they needed as a youth, and that's just so different what current youth might need. Yeah,
for sure. And I think a lot of the time organizations are not consulting the right youth as well. Yeah. Because when you talk about youth, so many people define that with different ages in mind. You know, they could go as young as like a kid in elementary school all the way up to someone who's in their 30s, who's well into their working life. And so something that I've learned, and you know, that's important for organizations to recognize, is that you need to narrow in on a very specific age group, because if you think about a 9th grader versus a 12th grader, their needs are so drastically different. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And so sort of leading into that, what do you think some of the kind of main challenges to engaging with young people are that you haven't already really touched on? Yeah. I think a lot of the youth nowadays value sort of a sense of coming into an environment and feeling like their voices are heard, and feeling like they can overcome certain barriers that maybe you haven't put in front of them, but that they're faced with. So for example, being a young person and coming into an environment where you're working with fully adults, or if you're volunteering and the whole volunteer team is older adults, or the people who are working are adults, like it can be very intimidating to bring new ideas to the table, to disagree, to think outside the box. And that's what a lot of youth want to be doing nowadays, is they want to be thinking outside the box, bringing something creative to the table, and feeling empowered when they're doing so. But by nature, even if you're doing the most you can to create a supportive environment as an adult, a lot of youth need other youth in their presence to feel supported, to feel like they have that sort of community, and to feel like they're in the right place. Yeah, I think that is a really important piece as well, because there's inherently a power dynamic when you have a young person versus, you know, someone, you know, who's more solid in their career, in the role that they're in. And I think that power dynamic often isn't acknowledged in the way that it could and should be, because it really does influence the ways in which
someone might feel comfort being able to challenge something in particular, because if if the work isn't being created with the target demographic, in this case youth, it's being created for them rather by them. I think that often leads to that disconnect where, again, the engagement with youth doesn't stick because it's assuming what they need versus actually finding out.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's a huge barrier that I think people don't think enough about when they're going to youth engagement. It's so easy to create these ideas and these programs, but then to actualize them and be able to reach that audience. So we talked a little bit about centering in on what age group you want to work with, but beyond that, youth engagement has to reach your audience. And as we talked about digitalization before and social media, a lot of organizations don't know how to navigate that nowadays, and especially those that are being run by older adults or people who are maybe not so in touch with like the trends of social media and TikTok. And so it's really hard to stay moving, and social media is a challenge for a lot of people to maintain. It's a resource heavy sort of area, and so I think, to work around that, organizations can look at how can they tag along to or support platforms that are built by youth on social media through partnerships. I think that's a great strategy.
Yeah, because I think a lot of folks feel like there might be risk in going with those ideas that youth are bringing forward because they are new to them and they're maybe untested. And it's also likely that they know how they're connecting with their own peers. So they have a sense of like, well, this is what I know will stick. I've seen it, kind of across the board. I used to do social media management, and I was like, I think I need to learn about TikTok. I still haven't fully dove in. I am still that person that like my friends will send me things that they think will be relevant, and I'm like, cool.
No, I'm very much the same way. I don't have TikTok, but I know people who do, and so leaning on those. Because as I mentioned before, maybe your organization or your group doesn't have the skills to do that, but there are tons of young people out there who want to take that leadership and who want to help. So it's a matter of just expanding your network and meeting them.
And really recognizing not only the value of those different avenues, but to your point, what are the different values of those different age groups as well? Like when I was figuring out my career path, I was thinking about teaching high school. So I spent some time in high schools. I was still, like this was a few years ago, so I was in like my mid-20s. And what I noticed was like there were teachers who really connected with their students who recognized that their students are becoming adults, and they're becoming young adults, and they have, they're exploring their morals and they're exploring their values and really trying to understand who they want to be, and that they have a lot to offer versus other teachers who maybe just kind of saw them as still too young to really have ideas and opinions. And there was a really strong disconnect in, how those students were able to thrive with those teachers, because being able to give like that particularly like 15 to 18 range some freedom and some ability to test and experiment and make mistakes, I think is such an important part of engaging with youth. Like allowing the space to make mistakes with safety is something that I think organizations can really offer as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that with organizations, it's very important who are looking to engage with youth. It's very important to consider a balance between supporting versus hand-holding all the way. Because a lot of young people go to volunteering and they're told, okay, let's say we're running an event, and they're told to like stack up a set of chairs, and they're told exactly how to do it, and there's no room for them to explore something that actually they're passionate about. And I think today's generation is very purpose-driven. A lot of young people are very passionate. They have ideas. They have this sort of internal drive that is carrying them to do whatever it is, volunteer work, jobs, extracurriculars. And so if you're not able to offer that sort of passion alignment, whether it's running an event, how can you look for opportunities for youth to explore their passions through that event, while also, if you have these base tasks they need to be getting done. So it's a matter of finding a nice balance between, again, hand-holding and supporting, where they can explore and they can learn, but also they have this sort of safety net that they know they can fall back on and they can trust in.
Yeah, and that leads into my next question of, what do you think youth are looking for when engaging with organizations? You mentioned that purpose-driven fire in them, for lack of a better word. Like what else do you think that they're looking for when they're engaging?
Yeah, something that's very tangible is a lot of young people are thinking about their futures, especially when they're in high school. They're thinking about how the things they're going to do now are going to contribute to growing them, their skills, growing them in terms of post-secondary, getting jobs in the future, and making friends that are going to last past high school and last past that time in their career, in their youth. And so what a lot of organizations can be doing to stay relevant and appeal to young people is make that clear tie between what you're offering and how that's going to contribute to them further down the line. So for example, if you're running a program where youth can come and create art, and we did a program with London Cycle Link to help youth create community-based art with an environmental focus, the appeal there was then how can environmental activism connect to a career or an interest further down the line. And we were able to draw a very clear tie between the social environmental cause and art as a career. And so we had professionals come in and offer training, and we connected to different universities and programs that were possible for youth afterwards, so that they can see that clear tie between what they're doing now and how it's going to contribute to them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so many of the things that you do as like extracurricular, as with your friends, like spending so much time in nature, maybe that actually leads to a career choice or something that you want to do long term. So having the space to, again, test out and try a variety of different things is a value that an organization can offer, while still recognizing that the youth also bring a really important value. It's not like a one-sided relationship, it's super mutual, and it's like a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and that brings me to a good point about mutual learning in youth engagement, because we talked a little bit before about recognizing the knowledge youth bring to the table, but it is that mutual relationship that happens when a young person comes to do something in your organization or with you. Is they can teach you just as much as you can teach them, and it's about shifting that mindset, and with that, shifting that power dynamic we talked about before.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about, why it's really important to engage with youth, and, some of the challenges that folks might face when trying to engage with youth. As someone who both is a youth and has done a lot of work in engaging youth and supporting organizations in engaging with youth in a meaningful way, what are some strategies that organizations can use?
Yeah, something that's very actionable is building a youth engagement policy for your organization. Although this is not, something that's going to be directly facing towards getting youth into the organization, it's going to help you build that foundation so that when youth are showing up, they're feeling supported. You have policies around certain aspects of working with them, about even addressing that power dynamic we talked about before, or accessibility needs for different types of youth. So important to be doing that work up front before you're going out to bring youth in, and you have the lessons later on. And along with that youth policy, I think that it's so important to develop it with youth. We talked about nothing for us without us, and that applies for every step of the way. This strategy is centered around bringing youth advisors in to help build this policy, inform the policy. Even further than that, I think if you have the opportunity to have a youth sit on your board, that's a great way to bring youth into the space. Or furthermore, on that point, being able to have youth share in decision making within your team, within the work you're doing, about the program you're building, about the work you're delivering. When you have a young person's input, other young people can feel that when they read about the program, when they show up in the space. And that brings me to the point of authenticity, is don't try to be something you're not when you're advertising to young people, because they can right off the bat sense that. So much.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point around the youth policy, because I think that, you want to set folks up for success and for folks to thrive. And so having some sort of policy in place just also forces an organization to really think about, okay, well, where's the equity built in to engaging with youth? You know, you mentioned a youth advisory panel. I used to sit on many of them when I was a youth, and I'm pretty sure I was paid in pizza more times than I could count. And I think that kind of lends itself to this idea that the value of youth input is pizza versus like, it's not.
No, that's such a great point.
It's so much more than that. So like, how are you ensuring that if you're bringing youth into the fold, you're doing so, again, meaningfully so that it, you know, that you're able to demonstrate to them that you recognize the value and you're compensating for it. Whether like it's through resources like a monetary, honorarium, whatever it is. But, you know, it's, if you don't do that, it can lend itself to being really extractive. And then it is that power dynamic and that one-sided element and all of that.
Yeah, very similarly to you, I was on lots of different youth panels, youth advising, like so many different things. And I have had a range of experiences where I've gone to these conversations and I haven't felt like my voice is heard. I'm not being, you know, my knowledge is not being awarded. And it's important to recognize, as you mentioned, the value that youth are bringing into the space. And so something very tangible is offering those resources, whether it's mentorship or some sort of educational opportunity, or largely a lot of the time youth will show up if you're offering them some sort of monetary award. Especially for those equity seeking groups who maybe they're in high school and they have no choice but to work part-time jobs to support themselves, their families, and so taking, you know, 2 hours out of their day might not be accessible for them unless there is some sort of monetary award.
And then, you know, then their voices aren't included at the table when it's likely their voice that most needs to be heard. This brings me to a really interesting point, which I did not include in my question, so we'll see. But so again, I think you and I are similar in that, participated in a lot of these like youth advisory things. I was often kind of deemed like a high achieving youth. And so often there was space created for me, like whether or not it was fully equitable, like there was a desire to engage with a youth like me because I fit a certain type of mold. And I think that what you mentioned around, you know, making sure that those equity seeking and equity deserving folks, youth included, are able to participate is something that isn't necessarily thought about as much. Like, how can we engage with the youth that either don't have the capacity or just have never had the life experience to kind of lend themselves to fitting in to those types of spaces? Like, how do we do that? And I think the policy piece is a really important part. But yeah, I mean, in your experience with working with youth, how have you tried to navigate that?
Yeah, it's complicated to navigate because when you think of neighborhood to neighborhood, it changes the youth needs, how they interact within their communities, religious backgrounds, how they interact socially. Like, it all changes based on your community. And so it brings me back to the point of like really knowing who you want to be talking to, who you want to be engaging with is super important because no one knows those communities better than the youth in them. And so, as you talked about, like there are all these high achieving youth and, you know, people who are putting themselves out there and who are reaching for these opportunities, but a lot of the time they're not always the ones who need that extra sort of support or that extra outreach. And so a very easy thing to do is go to communities where this communication is already happening. There are a lot of great organizations in London, for example, such as CCLC, the Cross Cultural Learner Center, or LUSO Community Services, or even your local resource center that is already engaging with youth through other programming that are supporting them. And it's really easy to work with them to reach those youth rather than trying to build your own channels of communication.
Yeah, I think it kind of lends itself to that ecosystem approach of, you know, who in the community, who in that kind of realm of work that you're in is already reaching those audiences or is already doing that work so that you can then partner with them to offer a more like well-rounded experience versus trying to fill gaps that are being filled by someone else. So how can you strengthen each other versus like try and do the same thing?
Exactly, yeah. And the other piece I would add is also being able to provide spaces where they feel at home. And so I think about, my experiences growing up. I went to an elementary school that was just outside of the city of London. And so it was predominant. I was the only person of color in the entire school, being completely transparent. And so I grew up being very shy, very introverted, felt like I was out of place for my entire elementary experience. And then when I went to high school, I was surrounded by other people who looked like me, who shared similar cultural backgrounds, who had similar family experiences. And so it was really easy for me in that high school environment to feel supported. And I think that principle carries over to when you're doing youth engagement in community, is being able to offer those spaces where they feel in tune with the people around them.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Okay, Aditi, I have one more question for you. It's one that we like to ask everyone before we sign off. Can you share one thing that is bringing you joy? It can be absolutely anything, just the first thing that pops into your head.
Right now I'm working with some young women who are leading a project in the community, and every time I chat with them, it brings me so much joy seeing what they accomplish and how they're carrying themselves and what they're doing in the community is so amazing.
Amazing. Can you share what organization is?
It's Champions of Change.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but they're the lead. They're the current CEOs of Champions of Change, and so they're figuring out what's next for them, both academically and with the organization. And so they're facing a lot of barriers right now, trying to transition into university. And so for me, it's being able to provide support in terms of that huge life transition, and also in terms of the community engagement work that they're doing.
Amazing. And then before we kind of wrap up, where can folks find out more information about you and the youth engagement work that you're doing here?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, I would say. I have a profile there, just Aditi Basdeo, or you can check the Pillar website for my Pillar contact.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Aditi. It is, always just such a delight getting to chat with you. And I'm really excited for all the things that we're going to be doing together in the future.
Of course. Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you. Thank you once again to Aditi for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about Pillar Nonprofit Network and the work that we're doing here more broadly, you can head on over to pillarnonprofit.ca. If you'd like to stay up to date on some of the workshops and offerings that are being delivered, including some youth engagement work, you can sign up for a free newsletter on the website as well. And if you're interested in some strategy and consulting around youth engagement, stay tuned for some offerings that we'll be launching soon with Aditi leading the helm. Thank you once again. I am your host, your guide, your business bud, Miriam Ulici, and this has been Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business. Thanks for joining the ride. I'm glad that you're here.
Pollinating purpose. Pollinating purpose. Pollinating purpose. Pollinating purpose, a caring approach to business. Welcome, everybody.